Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Melissa Fairless, and I am the president of Advocates for Excellence in Education. It's a group of citizens that are working on spreading the word, actually awareness about Common Core. And this evening, at the very end, around 7:45, we're going to allow you to, if you have a question, to come up and ask the panel. However, if you feel uncomfortable doing that, there's little white cards that are on each seat. We ask that you write down your question and your contact information, and you can go ahead and drop it off with Denise, who's at the booth for Advocates for Excellence in Education. If you would like more information after this evening or about this evening, again, put it on the index card and drop it off over there, and we will do our best to get to you in a timely manner. I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I am a mother of 2 children. I have a son who is a junior, and I have a daughter who is in 5th grade. And I'm very involved in my kids' education, and I basically just found out about Common Core in March of 2013. And I have some concerns about various aspects of Common Core, so I am very, very excited to hear some of the scholars tonight that have been involved at the beginning that can educate us and give us some information, and I hope that you guys find it as interesting as I hope to. I think as parents and aunts and uncles and grandparents and citizens, we need to gather as much information as we can and not just rely on what's being told to us by districts and by the media. So with that, I just wanted to introduce myself and tell you that I think as parents and just everybody out there, it sounds like you guys want to hear a little bit more. So what I want to do is I want to introduce the mayor again of Sanger. His name is Joshua Mitchell. He will be the mayor come 3 years, December 7th of this year. He is married with 6 children. He has 4 boys and 2 daughters. They're twins. And he was born and raised in the Central Valley. And so I think that this should be a good opportunity for us to give a warm welcome to him, and then he will introduce the panel. And thank you again for taking the time out of your busy schedule. Joshua.
Okay, there's a very short leash on this, so I won't be moving around. And now you know why I am emceeing this evening. I have more kids than all of you. Okay, so I'm going to have more kids go through this, all right? Does that sound right? More kids than all of them combined, okay? And by the way, she didn't mention this, up until last Monday, they were all 6 and younger. And I know what you're wondering, we need to get this guy a television? But we're going to yield the time over to our professionals this evening, and we're very grateful for them. And I'd like to read out their bios if that doesn't make you guys blush, okay? And these are very lengthy, so don't consider these obituaries either, okay? I got her to smile. I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to get her to smile. Dr. Sandra, to my right here, Stotsky, is 21st Century Chair in Teacher Quality and Professor Emeritus at the University of Arkansas. She served on the Validation Committee for the Common Core Standards Initiative and is also a member of the National Mathematics Advisory Panel appointed by Secretary of Education Margaret Spellings. As Senior Associate Commissioner at the Massachusetts Department of Education, she directed the state's pre-kindergarten to 12th grade standards for history and social science, English, language arts, and reading, mathematics, science, and technology engineering. Dr. Stotsky earned her doctorate with distinction at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Let's give her a round of applause. Dr. James Milgram will be addressing this as well this evening. He's on the southern side, is Professor of Mathematics Emeritus at Stanford University. He was one of the authors of the previous California standards and the main reviewer of the NCTM curriculum focal points. Additionally, he served on the National Board of Education for Education, Science, and oversees the IES, the research arm of the U.S. Department of Education. And he also served on the NASA Advisory Council, as well as the Validation Committee for the new core standards. He has published over 100 research papers in mathematics and 4 books which by the way is 104 more than me, as well as serving as an editor of many others. He received his undergraduate and master's degrees in mathematics from the University of Chicago and his PhD in mathematics from the University of Minnesota. Mr. James Milgram, thank you for being here. And I was tempted to hand the microphone over to you to pronounce your very first name, but I'm going to do my very best this evening. Is it Ze'ev? Very good. All right. Wurman, I was very nervous, by the way. A visiting scholar at the Hoover Institution, was a U.S. Department of Education official under George W. Bush, is currently an executive with Monolithic 3D Incorporated in 2010. Wurman served on the California Academic Content Standards Commission that evaluated the suitability of Common Core standards for California, and is co-author with Sandra Stotsky of Common Core Standards Still Don't Make the Grade. We're very grateful for you being here this evening. Now at this time, I'm going to go ahead and yield the time over to you. We're going to listen to a presentation from each. I will grab the microphone, at which time, again, you've been instructed, if you can, to write down your questions. We will be giving you some opportunities to ask your questions. I have been given a stopwatch, and I've been told to use it, okay? I will be giving you guys 60 seconds. If you begin to talk about your last vacation to Israel or wherever it may be, you'll be told to not talk about such things, okay? Those are inappropriate, all right? I'll yield the time over to you.
Thank you. You will start first with an overview for us.
Okay. Good evening, and thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope it will be a pleasure for you.
You're
I did it wrong.
going to have to...
Okay, I guess I have to whisper to it. Okay, good evening to everyone. Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope it's going to be a pleasure for you. I live in the Bay Area in California, and the accent you hear is not from the Bay Area. I was born in one country, I grew up in another country. 30 years ago I came to the Bay Area, and since then I am a proud citizen of this country, and I'm grateful for it. That explains some of my accent issue. Second thing, I have a second job in life. I am actually an engineer, and an electronic engineer, and I have this device in my hand that has a special gizmo inside that when I push the button, all the active cell phones in the room will die. So I suggest you turn off your machines, or at least put them on silence, otherwise I will push the button. Okay, after giving you this unfair warning, let me move forward and tell you a little bit about the Common Core. Next slide, please. I want to give you some history because I was involved in monitoring the things early on. Both Sandra Stotsky and Jim Milgram on both of my sides were actually members of the validation committee. I was more of an interested observer. The history is that there was an argument that the states were manipulating the standards. They were pushing them down and trying to game the system of no child left behind. They called it the race to the bottom. In fact, this is the reason later on President Obama had his race to the top, supposedly to get out of the race to the bottom. Unfortunately for President Obama, there was no race to the bottom. There was a study after study, a couple of them at least, that checked the state standards during the No Child Left Behind period. And what they observed, to their own surprises, they admitted, is that it was walk to the middle. Not race to the top, not race to the bottom, walk to the middle, which is exactly what you would expect, because some states set their standard too high, others set it too low, so it's only natural that over the span of a decade, they ended up walking to the middle. But facts are not very useful to many people that want to change our education. So they invented the race to the bottom, and therefore they invented the race to the top as a solution to the race to the bottom. And part of this race to the top was also the pitch for a Common Core standard. Now you're told, oh, they are not federal standards. And indeed, they are not federal standards. However, they were written by Washington-based organizations, lobbying groups of the governors and the state superintendents of public instruction. They were paid by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who gave a lot of money to these two organizations, the NGA, the National Governor Association, the CCSSO, which is the Council of Chief State School Officers. And the major players that started this whole game were the AfEiE organization, that is a Washington-based organization to develop national standard for quite some time by now. College Board, which is the proud owner of the SAT, ACT, which is another testing organization, and the MSEE, the National Center for Education and Economy, our old friend Mark Tucker from the Clinton days, the Dear Hillary letter, if you remember him. Those were the main actors who pushed forward the Common Core standards. Only once this Common Core goalposts were set for what they called college readiness in September of 2009, other players were allowed to come to the table, and those include few educators, few professors, not very many, but the first group was mainly composed of those four organizations, which are mostly testing organizations. And each organization, each of the set of standards were really written by a set of 2-3 people. ELA were 2 people, MAS were 3 people. And that's it. They took feedback from many people, but they were solely responsible for the writing, and they didn't offer any transparency in their decision making, whether why they did some decision, why they did not take some advice. They were the sole writers. So when they say there is a lot of input, yes, a lot of people provided input during the time. Nobody saw any impact of the input. There was no reporting, there was no transparency. Those are private organizations we can write into. They don't have any public process. Next, if I may. In fact, Bill Gates was very generous. He not only paid for the writing, but also for the validation, and for developing content that is aligned to them, and for their promotion. And you have all these organizations that he seeded over the last 3-4 years with over $200+ million. Well, this is how the standards were written. So yes, it is true they are not federal standards. They are written by lobbying organizations in Washington, and they are effectively national standards, but not federal standards. So how do you enforce them across the nation? I mean, states normally don't pick up standards just because you want them to. Well, here the federal government actually took a major role. They had $100 billion of the stimulus recovery fund. Out of this $100 billion for education, there was 800 and some changes for overall, but 100 for education. 4.3 billion was carved for this race to the top teach. Basically, competition for a grant money that if you do this and that, you will have a chance of the money. One of the conditions was adopt state standards that are done by a consortium of states that has more than 50% of the states. Guess how many of those you can have? And if you didn't get the message, they also in 2010, the administration produced their blueprint for reauthorization of No Child Left Behind. It actually never went anywhere because the Congress was not willing to listen. But Common Core standards are there too. And now we have the flexibility waivers because there is no reauthorization. So we have the flexibility for No Child Left Behind. And again, Common Core standards are part of the same package. You want the waiver, you better have either Common Core standard or show us that they are basically the same as Common Core standard. Finally, to make everything walk the line, the federal government also directly funded the national assessment, the federal assessment. This is federal, not national, audit by 2 consortia. The Smarter Balance Consortium and the PARC, which stands some acronym that I don't remember right now. And the Department of Education has an oversight committee to monitor what they are doing. So they are not independent consortia. The US Department of Education is monitoring them. So I repeat, they were not written by the federal government, but they were certainly pushed on the states by the federal government, encouraged to be adopted, and made sure that they will be adopted by the assessment. Next. We had 8 weeks from June 2nd till August 2nd in 2010 to adopt the Common Core standard. When I say we, I mean we Americans, not we Californians. Everybody in this country had 8 weeks. If they wanted to apply for the second round of the race to the top, they had to adopt the standard by August 2nd. Normally, it takes 2 years or more. It was summer, it was a recession time, nobody heard about this, except for the education establishment, and 45 of the state beat the bullet and adopted them. I was on the member of the California Commission that evaluated them. We, at that point, in July, August actually, 2010, we added algebra in grade 8 with some enhancement and added some high school content. However, just earlier this year, the State Board of Education removed most of the changes, and today, California has mostly the vanilla Common Core in grade K to 8. So there is no official option for algebra. There is no enhancement of standard. There is some added content in high school that we still don't know exactly how they were allowed, but that's what's left from the original recommendation of the Commission. Finally, maybe I should mention something that is obvious. What happens today, if you have a problem, you go to your teacher. If it doesn't solve your problem, you go to your superintendent, your school board. If it really still doesn't solve the problem, you go to your representative in Sacramento. You go maybe to the state school board. And that's it. Certainly, governor is the ultimate person that will direct some people to do something. And it's a public process, and they have to respond to you. You may not like the answer, but they have to respond to you. What happened now? Well, the standard that we have adopted, we could not change one letter in them. We have to accept them 100%. We can add up to 15% on top of them, but we cannot change one letter in what we have adopted. We cannot move a standard from grade to grade. We cannot decide that this standard is inappropriate at all and eliminate it. Even worse, we have no way to ask why this standard is there or how can we correct it, because there is nobody to ask. We'll go to Sacramento. Sacramento will correctly say, well, we got it from the Common Core. The Common Core will say, oh, sorry, it will not say anything because there is no Common Core anymore. The organization that brought them, the CCSSI, the Common Core State Standard Initiative, a joint effort of this National Governor Association and the CCSSO, the Chief State School Officer Organization, has disbanded. So not only that they don't have any process, any public way to answer it like any public organization, they don't exist anymore. The standards are frozen in ice, or in amber if you wish. Okay.
Is anyone having a hard time hearing real quick?
Yes.
Maybe. Why don't I try this one? This is any better? No, this is not better. Maybe this one. This is a good one. Yeah, this is good. Okay, let's try this one. Okay, I'm almost done on my intro. As you see also, we have no right to view the test. Regular state test, you can ask under certain conditions. I mean, you cannot take it home, you cannot copy it, but you can inspect it. You are a citizen in this state, you want to see what's going on in the test that your child takes. Sorry, this is not our test. This is the consortium paid by federal money test. You cannot see it. There are other issues, but I will go later on. Currently, the bottom line is no public process to do anything about them. Next. And this is my last slide for this section. We are left with standards that are mediocre, problematic, and large chunks of them are experimental without any research or empirical support. We have no process to change it. We have a very expensive and experimental test that will be coming piloted this year and coming down the pike next year officially, and nobody really knows how it will look like, when it will be good, bad. We do know that it's going to take almost 50% more time to administer. It's over 7-8 hours rather than what we had today, around 4 or 5. And we have no end of court test, and we have an issue that any data collected during this test of student achievement is going to be given to the consortium, which is natural. When they take a test, they will score them for us. Wonderful. Except that they have also in place an agreement to pass all this data on individual level, not aggregate, individual level student data to the US Department of Education. You cannot do anything about it. If you are using the test, now you can say, well, it's a test data, what can we do with it? And we'll talk about it. But the point is, the data is out of California's hand. We may like it, we may dislike it. The moment we use the consortium test, the data is out. The test data, whatever we give, that's it. Okay, I'm done. I will pass this to Sandy now, and I'm sure that she will do justice to the ELA.
This will also restrict the amount of hand waving I do, because if I'm going to speak to you, one hand has to be relatively stable. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I call the invalid validation committee, because you have to know that this is all built on a tissue of what I would not consider to be legal, and it may be legal in a governmental sense, but it certainly doesn't make any sense from a research point of view. And then I'll talk about the flaws in the English language arts standards in particular, because that is my area of expertise, both from Massachusetts and elsewhere. And then I will offer a few recommendations for where you go here. Those of you who are parents or citizens or others who feel that something needs to be done more than simply to lay back and let our entire public school system be run by a small group of people from behind the scenes who have manipulated the media and just about everybody else, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, businessmen, industrialists, and all the people who should know better and who should have been able to ask someone who knew, for example, mathematics and science, even if they didn't know how to read English. They should have been able to ask some experts about what they were promoting and endorsing. Let me begin a little bit with this invalid validation committee. As Ze'ev explained, this was not a state-led process from which Common Core standards emerged. And I will talk a little bit about the people who actually wrote the standards that are now being used in California or being implemented in California schools right now, as opposed to the kind of people who did your, at least math and science standards. We know a lot more about them nationally. I was, as the moderator indicated, on the validation committee 2009-2010, and was one of those very frustrated members, because no matter what information I asked for, the research base for international benchmarking, the research base for whatever they were doing in English language arts, I couldn't get any information. It became very clear to both Jim and I, we used to talk to each other. I couldn't say that I was doing this much talking with all the rest of them, and I'll explain why in a minute, but we realized we were basically to serve as rubber stamps on this Common Core Validation Committee. I've been on many town communities in my adult life, in the community I live in, and I had never been a rubber stamp on any of them. I was a town meeting member, I was a library board trustee, and you asked questions. You got answers from somebody, and everything you did, every kind of testimony that was given, or any kind of remarks that were made to you or sent to you by email, were always available by FOIA or available to you in print. Nothing was available. I sent comment, critique after critique to the standards writers, to the heads of the project, and never got any response to my critiques. They might have been read, they might have just been put in a bottom drawer, but I never knew, because I was never given the courtesy of a response, even though I was on something called a validation committee, and there were 25 to 29 of us. So one would have thought that these 25 to 29 eminent people deserved some professional courtesy, but we, at least so far as I knew, never knew what was going on with the rest of them, because we had all been asked to sign at our very first meeting something called a confidentiality agreement. Now, that was also new to us. I had never in my life been on any committee in which I had agreed, because that was the price for being on the committee, that you could not report on anything that took place in that committee's deliberations. We could do what we wanted, let our own criticisms or critiques go anywhere we want, but we couldn't say what happened or if the validation committee ever produced anything. We were sworn to secrecy. That means that even to this day, CCSSO has nothing to say, will not respond to any FOIAs, will not give any information out, not even why they chose the people they chose to be on the validation committee. Jim and I were the only two content experts on that committee. Ian, he was in mathematics, as you know. I was English language arts standards expert because of what I had done in Massachusetts and also for ACHIEVE with its American Diploma Project, Exit Standards in ELA. And it advised many states, including California, on its own ELA standards. All the rest had appointments in schools of education or were connected to the testing industry. How could that group of people ever validate either set of standards? And then, of course, who were the people on the Standards Development Committee, the group of people who, in the early part of 2009, developed the college readiness standards? One might think that, and common sense would suggest, that at least they knew something about college readiness, that they would be people who taught at the college level, freshman courses, or high school English and math teachers. For the most part, those were the two groups excluded. Now, that's a good clue that something's going on. Then when you're on a validation committee and there are only two content out of 29 people on the committee, two content experts, you have a further clue that something more is going on. What? You don't know exactly, but you certainly know that there are no particular set of interests in the content of these standards and in making sure that the college readiness level actually meant college readiness. What did it mean if you didn't have college level people in those areas who actually taught those courses? Let me say a little bit about the standards writers, because I knew a great deal about that from my experience in Massachusetts. First of all, I will confine myself to ELA because Milgram can easily talk about who the people were on the math standards team. David Coleman and Susan Pimentel are the two writers of the ELA standards that have been imposed on the country. Neither of them had any teaching experience in K-12 or at the college level. Now, that might not be a fatal deficiency. Neither of them had ever published any serious work on K-12 curriculum and instruction. Neither had a reputation for scholarship, and it was very clear that nobody in the field even, just trying to, knew who they were. To this day, they have no reputation in the field of literary scholarship or the field of teaching English. Is there something I should be doing here? Just a little closer. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. Why they had been chosen, who chose them, we still don't know. But David Coleman in particular, who is now, as you probably know, the president of the college boards, has been elevated to an even more responsible and powerful position. One of the many things that amazes me is that when they were announced as the standards writers for ELA, No one in the media commented on their lack of credentials. And indeed, to this day, no one in the media has ever shown the slightest interest in their qualifications. That was something that was very important on a state level. Whenever we did state standards, certainly it made a difference here in California for your math and science standards because you had such serious wars. In Massachusetts, I was part of a war in every subject: the math wars, the English wars, the reading wars, the history wars. It didn't matter. Whatever subject we were doing, we were part of wars, and you had to be careful about the quality of the people who were writing the standards. I was getting academics from higher education because if anyone knew content, at least I was drawing on people with PhDs in the subject, and that would have to be addressed, whether it was history, mathematics, or science, or even literary scholarship. The point was, you want to be able to show that you have drawn on the best expertise you can. Certainly that would have been, for national standards, the most important thing to show, that you were developing your standards with the direct involvement of the most knowledgeable people you could, people with a reputation in the field. And we had unknowns who had never taught, doing whatever they wanted. And unfortunately, David Coleman ended up with some very bizarre ideas about both pedagogy and content, which I'll talk a little bit about in a few minutes when I get to the flaws of the ELA. In any event, towards the end of the year, on this invalid validation committee, we were asked, given a form, and according to the criteria and the charge of the committee, we were asked to sign off. I have 10 minutes to go, okay. And since neither of us could sign off, we were 2 of the 5 people who refused to sign off. And thereby, we entered the ranks of total anonymity because no one ever knew that we hadn't signed off until we began telling other people we hadn't, because even CCSI didn't bother to tell anybody that some of the people on the committee, 2 content experts, never signed off. In any event, that was the end, officially, of the validation committee. Now let me go to some of the problems in the English language arts in particular. Let me review what I often give as an immediate summary right away. First of all, let me just get this page turned with the one hand that I have. Number 1, the standards are not rigorous. Despite the fact that you hear the word rigorous used 35 times in every sentence by anyone who's promoting cognitive work, you have to understand that they aren't rigorous. The reason the word is used over and over again is because they're not rigorous. Common Core standards are not internationally benchmarked and cannot make our students competitive. That was what I discovered. You can ask anyone who says, and they constantly say it, we were informed by, we consulted, we reviewed, but then they never say they were internationally benchmarked by, because they can't. They were not internationally benchmarked, and if you ask someone to name a country, they can't give you one. So that's the way you handle that selective piece of disinformation. There is no research to support their stress on writing instead of reading, and that's one of the flaws I will discuss briefly. There is no research to support their stress on informational reading instead of literary study. This is something I can say and speak to at greater length because my background is in reading research and reading instruction. And there is no research to support the value of cold reading of historical documents. This is a bizarre fantasy that David Coleman cooked up because he said it was going to level the playing field. Equally ignorant children approaching the same historical document. Can you imagine trying to understand the Gettysburg Address without knowing why Lincoln said it, where, and in what part of the Civil War he made that address? Well, he didn't level the playing field, and we're supposed to be teaching teachers to do that. And in fact, most of what he recommends pedagogically is contradicted by most reading research, if you can find any agreement at all in the field. First of all, major flaw. Most of the ELA standards, both the college readiness and grade level standards, are content-free skills. They're not standards at all. They have nothing in them to indicate cultural content or level of reading difficulty. It is true Appendix B provides a list of works that supposedly suggest levels of complexity, but they range to such a degree within each grade level that there is no way that you can get a sense of what that grade level should be for the reading level of that grade. They do not require the study of the history of the English language. They do not require authors from the ancient world, selected pieces from the Bible as literature, so that students can learn about their English, their influence on English and American literature. We had standards like that in Massachusetts, all agreed to by English teachers in Massachusetts. Second major flaw, and this is a serious one that I only really came to grips with about 2 months ago when I was writing a report for a Georgia legislator. I began counting the standards. Common Core spends more time on writing rather than reading at almost every grade level. Now, you ask any teacher in the schools and they will tell you that what our students need to learn how to do first is read. There is a ton of research, almost 100 years, showing the primacy of reading over writing. You cannot become a good writer if you're not a good reader. Writing is secondary to reading. You have to practice writing, but reading has to be first. And, pardon, hold this, Mr. I'm not holding it right directly.
What I think is, can you hear this a lot better? Okay, so do you remember that kid that was always misbehaving in class? And you're yelling at him?
I wasn't that close to them when I yelled at them in the third grade. Sorry. A third, push me on, tap me on the shoulder and I'll get closer. The standards are developmentally inappropriate, many grade levels. Again, I can't spend time going into the details, but I could give you more of those details. Fourth, they expect English teachers to spend at least half of their reading instructional time on informational texts. I've been challenged on this because of some 70-30 number, which I can't go into here. But there are 10 standards for informational reading and 9 for literary at every grade level. Do the arithmetic. It's actually more than 50% for informational, and there's nothing to support it in any form of reading research or cognitive psychology, where I asked a few professors I knew in psychology, developmental psychology. Nothing that would support that as the way to get to college readiness. What we do know historically and empirically is that students need to read complex literature, which their teachers, English teachers, teach them to read between the lines. That's how they learn to do critical and analytical thinking and reading. It doesn't come from reading informational materials in grade 9, 10, and 11 in other subjects, which are not part necessarily of those other subjects, and which can't be done in the English class because the English teacher cannot teach information in other areas. She's not trained to do that if she's an English teacher. Now, we have a few more that I want to talk about briefly. Common Core standards are not fewer, clearer, and deeper, which is another mantra, like rigorous, that you hear all the time. They may appear to be fewer in number, and I discovered that the reason they appear to be is that they will take a number of activities and put them together in one standard. They're bundled into one standard incoherently. So it looks like you have fewer standards to deal with, but that's because each standard contains so many different parts that you can't deal with any one standard on its own. You've got to deal with it in parts. So that means that you have poorly written standards. And I've been talking about the close to gibberish that I have seen in those standards since January of 2010, offending David Coleman, who thinks he knows how to write English despite being an English major, and he doesn't know how to write English very well. because the standards are extremely poorly written, which is why we have differing interpretations of them all the time. And we have very weak vocabulary standards. Now, what are some things to do in just a couple of minutes, because there are more things that could be said about these problems in the standards. What could California do? One thing it should do is readopt its own superior standards. Your ELA standards were among the best in the country. Why should you go to the worst? Not the worst, but something that doesn't even resemble a set of standards. You had much, much better and real standards before. I know them well. Third, or second, I should say, it would be a waste of time to implement Common Core standards and use the tests that are based on them. What you should try to do is, if you have your own children or your own grandchildren or other people's children that you can influence, have them opt out of any Common Core based tests. You are allowed to do that in California by state law. Your communities must give state tests, but you as parents have the right, as I understand it, to opt your children out of whatever tests you don't want them to take. And you can make it a point of opting out of any Common Core based pilot tests or regular tests. Vote with your feet. That's what parents can do as a last resort. Because what Common Core's promoters want above all is your students' test score. That's what they need above all, and you must try to keep that test score. That's what your teachers will be evaluated on. That's what will form the basis for the data profile that will be made of your children in the future. Well, they will get into college by the grades. That's a very good question. By the grades that their teachers give them in class, which is what they always used to get into college 4 years ago. Many states stopped giving SATs, by the way, or ACTs. So they use the teacher-made tests, or they can develop their own matriculation tests, which used to be in place in this country in every state and for many of the colleges who had different matriculation tests. We can go back to the same system. You do not need Common Core in that sense to get your kids into college. They may make it a requirement, but there are other ways. Colleges can interview students, and they can find other ways that their own faculty decide upon. Go on, finish. Okay, I'm going to finish with two more. First, the other point is that we should have alternative high school curricula for students to choose among. That would help with the dropout rate. We have a network in Massachusetts of wonderful career, vocational, technical high schools, 26 of them that have waiting lists. Their parents want their children. They are not dumping grounds. They have to take basic subjects, the same as everybody else. But those kids who graduate, and the attrition rate is almost zilch, from grade 9 to grade 12, they know that they have jobs when they graduate, they have a high school diploma, and often an occupational certificate that they have chosen. They are happy kids, and I've seen them in their schools. But above all, and this is my final recommendation, you need to radically restructure and reform your education schools, which are the source of most of the major problems leading to Common Core. And that requires a whole other talk on its own. Thank you.
Okay. I'll try to keep it about an inch from my face. Okay. Okay, touching? Okay. All right. So be it. Okay. Next slide. And click again. So I'm going to, very briefly, I'm going to give you some education school secrets. What is it that the teachers, pre-service teachers, learn in the education school? Well, the major thing they learn is not what you think. They learn how to teach the kids to be good citizens. Then, but I gotta wave my hand. So.
You understand?
Then they give, that wouldn't be a bad idea. Yeah, let's move my hand waving to be seen. Okay. And then the next thing is that they're given an education that is described as efficient in the in preparation in the education schools, where from their perspective, they're given the education that they need, but probably not the education they or their parents would want. So these are the, and now I'm going to go through a little bit of the priorities within the subject matter areas to show you the kind of things we're dealing with. Now I'm looking back a number of years, but I've been around for a number of years. So the first case in point is we used to have history and geography in the schools. Kids learned where things were in the world. Kids learned the stories of the War of the Roses and the wars in Germany and things like that. They knew about all sorts of things that were important to know, but not immediately applicable. So the education schools didn't like that. It wasn't efficient. So they replaced it with social studies, which teaches about their neighborhood, their city, their state, finally the country, and it stops. Now, abstract mathematics, that's my game, but it's also the game that's played in every technical application, every technical area there is in medicine and in a lot of other major areas. Abstract mathematics is considered unnecessary in the education schools, so it is removed, and all students are expected to know is arithmetic. Well, that was the case because I'm going back a ways. But of course, today it's a little different. Today we don't need arithmetic because hand calculators work faster. Not better, but faster. Okay. So continuing, arithmetic's gone, but we're supposed to be. There's been a lot of parental pushback on this, and as far as I'm concerned, push back. But what's happened is arithmetic has been replaced by something that the education community calls higher order thinking, skills, and problem solving. The trouble is, absolutely nobody knows how to teach this. In fact, virtually nobody knows anything about what it actually is. It's what you learn to get a PhD in mathematics or in physics or in chemistry. It's what you learn there in order to write original papers. It's a different level. So public education has a fix. They change the meaning of the words. And they teach something else that has nothing whatsoever to do with problem solving and higher order thinking. So now go to the next slide. Yes. So now let's focus on mathematics a bit. And now the next slide. And I think skip this slide, just go zipping through it. This is a story that I got. So I'm going to introduce one of the two lead authors. It was stated that there were three. Well, one of them was a cipher. All he did was to say what his higher-ups said would have to be done by the other two. The other two were Bill McCullum and Jason Zimba, both PhD mathematicians, both having never written standards before in their lives, but they were enthusiastic. So we'll start with the stated objective of the Common Core Standards, which is workforce and college readiness. And let's forget the workforce for a moment. Let's look at Common Core Standards, college readiness. Well, you can't look at college readiness until you have a definition. I mean, you have to say what it is. And so here is Zimba's testimony about this. Okay, click.
It leaves us with all the thorny problems of exactly what that means. But we have agreement to the extent that it's a fuzzy definition that the minimally college-ready student is a student who's passed Algebra 2.
Okay, stop it. All right, let's wait for a minute here. Think about this for a minute. I'll go back, if there's time, I'll go through later and show you that what Algebra 2 meant 20 years ago, or 1982, that's 30 years ago, what it meant then only allowed 46% of kids whose highest math course was Algebra 2 to get a 4-year college degree. But in 1992, 10 years later, a lot of more kids were taking Algebra 2, and now the percentage of them that got college degrees was 39. And today, whereas even more kids are taking Algebra 2, we only have an estimate because it will be another 5 years before the government reports the exact numbers, but the estimate is 31 to 33%. So if this is the definition of college readiness, what they expect is only 33% of the kids who are college ready will ever get a college degree. Okay, next slide. What happened?
It leaves us with all the thorny problems of exactly what that means. But we have agreement to the extent that it's a fuzzy definition that the minimally college-ready student is a student who's passed Algebra 2.
Okay, all right. Ze'ev is going to fix this now. So later, Sandy, that's her, asked Zimba to clarify the definition of college readiness. Well, we don't need to go into that. Okay, hey, give me another line here. And here is the resulting exchange. So go to the next slide, okay? And now we'll repeat the process, but we're going to stop every sentence or so.
The definition of college readiness, I think it's a fair critique that it's a minimal definition of college readiness.
For some colleges.
Okay, stop.
Well, for
Just click it, yeah. Okay, it's a minimal definition. This is one of the two lead authors of core standards. And he is admitting it is a minimal standard for college readiness. And now Sandy is interjecting here the question for some colleges, and here's the continuation.
For the colleges most kids go to, but not that most parents probably aspire, right?
It's not for STEM, it's not for engineering.
That's true. It's not only not for STEM, it's also not for selective colleges that, for example, UC Berkeley, whether you're going to be an engineer or not, you better have pre-calculus to get on.
Okay, stop. Well, I suspect that a fair number of you here are parents with kids in the school system. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about being told that your kid is going to be prepared for a college which is not a selective school like UC Berkeley, but is in effect is a 2-year community college? So keep that in mind. Now continue.
And that's true. I think the third pathway goes a lot towards that. But your issue is really broad.
Stop again. Now, there's a third pathway he's talking about here, and that's a pathway to calculus. The trouble with this pathway is it existed in March of 2010 when he was giving this testimony, But it doesn't exist today. It was taken out for every bit of that third pathway was removed from core standards. Core standards stop with Algebra 2, period. So you don't get, and you're not expected to get, anything more than Algebra 2 with core standards. Okay, continue.
So I just wanted to make sure that we got that out.
Just thinking of selective colleges, there's a much broader question here.
That's right. It's both, I think, in the sense of being clear about what this college readiness does and doesn't get you, and that's the big subject.
But don't to call something college ready when it only applies to a certain kind of college and a certain lower level of mathematical expertise that won't buy you far on the international market in most major disciplines of technology, economics, business, and so on.
Okay, thank you. That's
All right, let's review. Every teacher makes sure that that what you just went through, you get reviewed, right? So here we are. Two things to notice. As I pointed out, the third pathway doesn't exist. And second, college readiness is not for STEM, and it's not for selective colleges. So nobody expects a kid coming from core standards to major in science, technology, engineering, or mathematics, and any affiliated field as well. So this is important for parents to know. Okay. Now, this is beautiful. I love his phrase here. The colleges most kids attend, but not for the colleges most parents aspire to. And it isn't even true. Most kids don't attend community colleges. 45% of them do, but that's not most. So, okay, again. So we can skip this. And now, let me point out something. Mathematically, when we wrote the California standards, putting together the more advanced courses was a matter of about 2 weeks. And I was one of the authors, so I'm not exaggerating. It was dead easy to put in the advanced stuff. It took serious thought to put in K through 6, K through 7, K through 8. But once we got to the stuff we really knew, it was dead easy. And there was no reason that it could not have been easily added to the document. So not adding it to the document was a conscious choice, not on the part of the authors, Zimba, and what you heard at the end from Zimba was pretty clear to me that he was grateful to Sandy for bringing this out because he didn't have the authority to say it himself. But at any rate, so they wanted to go further, but they weren't allowed to by people further up in the food chain. Okay. And now, next slide. So what's going on? Again, I think I've already covered this, so we can skip this. So I'm going to conclude with just a brief analysis of the data that relates to what Algebra 2 gets you. If you stop with Algebra 2, or you stop with trigonometry, or you stop with calculus, what does that get you in terms of college? Okay? So, next slide. So here's the determination of the odds of finishing a 4-year college degree based on the single most important factor in that analysis, actually, which is the highest math course you took in high school. And then to the next slide. Okay, here we are. Now, there's a very light blue. You see the line for Algebra 2 here. And then the left two columns are for the class of 1982. The right columns are for the class of 92. And as I told you earlier, 46.4% chance of earning a degree in 82 if Algebra 2 was the highest course, and 39% dramatic drop in 10 years later. And that's tied in, I think, to the increase in the number of students. But at any rate, okay, next slide. Well, it's worth pointing out what happens with trigonometry, where there's a dramatic shift in the percentages. So over 60%, you've gone up to pre-calculus. So let's look back at the trigonometry. 65% chance in 82 and a 60% chance in 92. And that next slide. But now when you get to pre-calculus, and it's even better in calculus, 76% and 75%. So that's really no change between the 10 years. You're beginning to look at a stable situation. You get to the point of pre-calculus in high school, you have at least a 3 out of 4 chance of obtaining a 4-year college degree. Okay, next slide. Now, this is a slide that I'm going to show you, and it really makes me angry. But I'll show it to you anyway. I doubt that, I think it will take you a while to get as angry as I am. But at any rate, here it is. Okay, so we've just shown with the last 3 slides how important the highest level course, math course you take in high school is to a student's future. Okay, so the next logical question to ask is how are the schools, the high schools distributed that actually have the teaching capacity for these various courses? Now, it was broken up in 2 ways. It was broken up into race, ethnicity, and that's not important. That data is relatively random. But look at the data when you break it up by economic wealth in the district. This is the data here, and here. Same data set. Okay, so what you're seeing here, at least from my perspective, is you're seeing that in the lowest quintile of districts, only 43.5% have the calculus course available in the high schools, whereas in the highest quintile of economic wealth in districts, over 70% of those high schools have it available. It's a little better in trig, but it's not that much better. So when you look at this data and you think about it and you ask, well, look, core standards does not require these higher courses. So it's an expense that they don't have to spend. And when the high school teachers that teach this thing retire in the poorest districts, the chances of them being replaced is much smaller than it is in the higher economic districts. So the kids that are hurt by this long term are the kids who come from the poorest families in the country, and even to the middle, they're hurt. But anyway, this is a slide that, as I said, it really upsets me. Okay, I think that this is enough. Everybody is probably very bored with all this technical stuff, and so Ze'ev has some final remarks.
Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay. So I will try to go quickly through the rest of my slides. Some of them I will skip, but I want to go through some details. Next, please. What is a successful program? That's the first question. And you are actually in a pretty decent school district, more than pretty decent, a very good one. We want to see increased advanced mass course takings, increased success, and we want to see the minorities not left behind, the disadvantaged not left behind. Those are characteristics of a good system. Well, let's look at the last decade or two, decade plus. Next. Oh, sorry, back. My mistake, I'm sorry. We know about the Massachusetts miracle. We heard about Massachusetts jumping to the head of the states about 10 years back, 8 years back. But we also heard that California, with all its great standards, actually didn't do so well. That's what we all heard, I'm sure. Most of us should have heard that. Let's look, really. Now, skip this one, skip, next. Okay, let's stop here. We don't have much time and I don't want to waste time. This is the record for Algebra 1 taking in California, statewide, from 1999. When we started, we had 16%, 16. Today we have 67-68% of the cohort taking algebra by grade 8, 7 and 8 really. As you notice, the higher bar on the upper part is the proficient and above. Those are the successful takers. Despite the enormous increase, the fraction of the successful taker kept growing. And the actual number is on the bottom. And look at that. We had 52,000 successful Algebra 1 takers. Today we have 170,000, more than 3 times many. We are talking about tens of thousands of kids every year. Next slide. This is Algebra 2. In other words, just doing Algebra 1, you say, well, what a big deal. No, it is a big deal because it enables children to take more advanced courses in the same graph. And you see the numbers keep growing despite bigger number of takers. And again, 3 times as many students today than in the past are successful in California after 12, 13 years of the standard. Next. But we were told we are terrible on NAEP. So what happened here? Something is wrong. Grade inflation? No. The test is the same test. I actually served on this content review panel for this test for many years. Didn't change. The demographic has changed. We have the Latino student grew from 42 to 54. We have the low SES students, socioeconomic status, grew from 42 to 56. And the fraction of white dropped from 35 to 25. Next. The key to this success was rigorous K7 standards that prepared everyone, in theory, everyone, for algebra in grade 8. It doesn't mean that everybody was prepared, but everybody got a chance to get prepared. Thank you, Jim, by the way. You did it. Now, Algebra 1 taking, as I showed in the previous graph, more than quadrupled. Clovis was 14 years ago at 18%, a little bit above the state. The state was 1.6, you were 1.8. Now you are at 71, 3% above the state. You went with the state, but you had to work at it. Your success rate, also your average score, went from 353 to 390, which is very close to being advanced. You are very high end of the next. But these are the numbers for the minority students, because I described before just the cohort. But let's look how the minorities are doing. So you have Algebra 1 by grade 8, and you see between 2003 and 2012, those are the numbers in this chart. The blue is 2002. Look at the numbers in 2012 for the low SES, for African American, for Latino, for white. And it repeats itself for Algebra 2 and geometry. And note, the white didn't grow up so much because they already before got there, because they tend to be a bit more affluent, the parents are more pushy. But demanding K7 standards open the gates for everyone. And the ratio of the minorities and disadvantaged jumped up much more than the white. This is how a success looks like. That's the critical point of having Common Core or any set of standards. Prepare for algebra, early algebra, because if you start in with algebra only in high school, you will rarely meet even pre-calculus, even if you want to. And they will say, oh yeah, we will offer acceleration. And who will take this acceleration? Before we leave next chart, these are the same number, just you see how the various cohorts, the gap closed between over the years. The same data, just over time. Next. So, the people that will take the advanced, the accelerated classes, we need support. This support costs money and costs effort by the family. Those will tend to be not the disadvantaged kids. So the advantaged kid will populate the accelerated classes. So we'll go back to 1999. We did have some fraction that took algebra, except that most of them were in affluent districts, affluent families. And that's what Common Core is bringing us back to. We are essentially undoing what we have achieved over the last decade plus. Next. Okay, maybe let me just finish this part because I'm done here. And I speak quickly because I ran out of time and I want to leave a lot of time for questions. But let me make this point again. If we don't prepare everybody, potentially, for K7, it doesn't mean that we have to place them in graded necessarily algebra. But we want to give a chance to everybody who is willing to put the effort to be ready for algebra and do it. This will not happen. And Common Core doesn't do it. Hence, only those that get the extra will go ahead. Remember this message. Okay, some details, just very few slides to finish. California eventually joined the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium, and here are the testing time today under STAR system that we have had since 1999, and the Smarter Balance. The test time is going to be significantly harder. There is also an issue of cost of the assessment to the state, so you don't care about this so much, the state will pay. But there is also cost of technology that the state will not cover, the district will cover. You will have to have enough computers, enough technical support during the test time, enough bandwidth, and all this does cost money, and it costs money of your district. Next. Also, the administration time will be done in 2 windows. Today we do 1 window of about a month. This will be done in 2 windows. One somewhere around March, early April, with the performance items that are hand scored. And the second window later in the year, the computer adaptive testing. Again, 2 months out of 10 months school year, essentially disrupting regular classroom schedule, 20%. And the computers are not available because they're sitting in the testing classes. This is pretty expensive, but what does it buy us? Oh, it buys us that we can enroll the graduating student, if they are highly successful on the test, into college algebra for credit. College algebra is algebra 2, as Jim mentioned before. So much for the claim that Common Core is rigorous in preparing and broadening the STEM. Next. Now I want to touch on data collection, or data collection, I guess my accent. You know, a lot of people are sensitive about data collection. Privacy issues, a lot of rumors, you know, biometric data, retina scan, iris scan, you name it. Don't worry about this yet. This is not the big issue. The basic administration of testing, of a standard testing on standard set of content standard is the key. But you say that's the basic of testing, why do we worry about it? You should worry about it because suddenly almost every child in this country gets the same test, or at least one or two tests, on the same set of standards. So if you have access to individual record of the student, I don't care about his religion and his family income, that's not my point. Just his grade and his score on each and every item on the standard test nationwide. Suddenly, you can believe that you can actually predict what these students are good for. Because you have a full image, full picture of what items they did well over the years, what items they didn't do well. You understand what each item means because it's the same thing across the nation, so you can adjust everything. Wow. We can suddenly do workforce planning. We can tell every kid, oh, you are good for welder, you are good for flight instructor, and we have data to show you. So don't even try to go to school trying to learn something else, because we will not pay your loans. We will not encourage you. This is called the old school to work. It enables it. So it's not about the privacy data aspect. It's the basic uniform information about the testing that gives this power. Now, as I mentioned before, the consortium has a deal to pass student-level data to the US Department of Education. Never before. Now it can do it. But, you say, it's subject to applicable privacy laws. Next. Well, the privacy law is called FERPA, Family Education Record Privacy Act, I believe. Old law, but it has been reinterpreted just a couple of years back. And they reinterpreted the definition of what is an education program. Suddenly, you can give that information to non-educational agency, you couldn't do it before, like Human Services, work for a labor agency. Well, suddenly this data can be given to the central planners to work with it, because all the privacy law promise is gone. It was quietly eliminated. So it's not that California will give your fingerprint to the feds. I don't worry about that. It's not that they will give you the retina scan to the feds. They don't care about it either. They will give every score on every test item of every child. And that the feds already have. Next. They have already a program with a lot of private companies and public companies, non-profits, trying to figure out how they can use this standardized data that suddenly has meaning for them. We can plan. And there are websites, there are information, and they're not ashamed. It's not something they hide. That's exactly what they want to do. Because this is good for your children. It's good that we tell them what they can do and what they cannot do. Because this is our role as a smart and wise government. We are here to help you. Don't you know that? And look at the last thing. We're talking about the No Child Left Behind flexibility. We're talking about the future of No Child Left Behind. We can move from subgroups to a more personalized view where every single child gets what they need. Now, who is saying this? This is the Chief of Staff to the U.S. Department, Secretary of Education in the U.S. Department of Education. This is not something, somebody said, well, we could use it for this. This is how they see the world. And this is fine for them. They want to help. Truly, they're not pretending, I'm not joking. Those are well-intentioned people. They really want to help your children. And if you sometimes happen to be misguided, well, now they will have all the information that they need to help you decide. And if you don't like the advice, well, maybe we'll do something about it. Thank you.
So, I think we have to get these guys out of here real soon. I think what we should do is probably go ahead and bring conclusions to this evening. If you guys want to stay around and do a couple of sound bites for the camera, feel free to do so. Make sure, if you have a chance before they sneak out, to tell them thank you for spending their time with us. Let's give them a round of applause.